My name is Kpoto. I'm the Senior Manager of Direct Assistance and Training here at INCLUDEnyc. And I'm really happy to have Hannah with us today from the New York Peace Institute. I'll pass it on to Hannah so she can introduce herself to everyone.
Thanks, Kpana. And first of all, I want to say I do know that our names rhyme. It's very funny that we're Hannah and Kpana. So I'm Hannah Resnick. I'm here from New York Peace Institute. We are a mediation center that services Brooklyn and Manhattan. We handle a lot of different kinds of mediations, community disputes, housing court, landlord-tenant, co-parenting, surrogates court, civil court, and that's just to name a few. We also have a restorative justice program, and we have trainings in conflict resolution. I personally run the special education mediation and the early intervention mediation programs.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Katie, can you please launch the poll? We would like to get an idea of who's here with us today.
Yes,
so we just have a really quick poll. Okay, we're asking everyone if you could please complete this short poll. We have it available in English and Spanish. We'll just give it one more minute. Okay, Katie, we can go ahead and close that out. And what the result is about 50-50 in terms of parents and professionals that are here with us. And we have a wide range in terms of ages. So we have parents of young people as young as 0 to 3. And then we have some who are here with children who are much older. So from 0 to 3 all the way to 19 and older. So we have a wide variety here today. So we hope that everyone can take something away from this session. As Hannah and I have this discussion about, do you really need an impartial hearing? So our topic, do you need an impartial hearing? We'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. So in the meantime, please leave your comments in the chat. Also, if you have any questions, you can add your questions to the Q&A box. One thing I will ask though is please ask general questions and do not put specific information about your child in the Q&A box. Hannah?
Thanks, Kpana. So over 20,000 impartial hearings were filed last year. And maybe you're someone who's thinking of filing an impartial hearing, or maybe you already have. And you might be wondering, is there another option? So we're here today to talk about another option that's available to you, and that's mediation.
Okay. And so, here at INCLUDEnyc on our helpline, we often get calls, from families, and some of them may be having some issues with their child's school or their child's early childhood program, and they're trying to figure out how they can resolve these issues. And so parents typically face a wide range of problems and barriers while navigating special education here in New York City. And I'll just give a few examples of some of the things that come through on our helpline. One is a lack of service delivery, especially as we're coming out of the pandemic. We've had calls where a therapist has, like the speech therapist has left, or the occupational therapist has left, and the child has been going without their services. And so the parent has some concerns about that. There's also where a family may be seeking reimbursement for therapy. So say the therapist left and the parent decided to get an independent provider to provide these sessions for their child since there's no provider at the school, right? And now they want the district to reimburse them for that cost. Another issue that may come up is the parent and the school have a disagreement, or the parent and the IEP team have a disagreement about placement recommendations. Another one is disagreement about the evaluation results. So the parent had their child evaluated by the district and they do not agree with the results. And so now I'm going to pass it back to Hannah so she can talk about some of the due process options that parents may have when they encounter some of these issues.
Yeah, so these are issues we see all the time in mediation, right? They're really common. So what can a parent do when faced with one of these challenges? So for some of them, they can start with trying to talk to the school. So if they disagree with the evaluation results, they can try to talk to someone that they trust at the school. Maybe there's maybe the principal, or maybe there's just someone else like a social worker that they can speak to about this. If that doesn't work, they still have several options, right? Parents really have three options then. They can file for an impartial hearing. And as you know, that's a formal legal proceeding where the parent will present evidence, the school team will present evidence, and then the impartial hearing officer, who acts like a judge, will make a decision. And that decision will be binding on the parties. Another option is that the parent can request a mediation. And now a mediation can also end up in that binding decision, but the power to make that decision stays with the parent and the school team. So in a mediation, there's a mediator, but that person does not serve as a judge. They're trained to simply help support the conversation. So there'll be a conversation between the school team and the parent, and they'll really have like a brainstorming session, and hopefully they will reach an agreement. And if they reach an agreement, the mediator will help them write that agreement up. And once that's signed, that agreement is legally binding, and it has the same weight as an impartial hearing decision. Now, the third option that a parent has is they can do both. So they can file for an impartial hearing and request a mediation. You're allowed to mediate up to the date of the impartial hearing. So that means you really have two chances to try to resolve your dispute. You first mediate, and if that resolves, then fantastic. You don't have to go forward to the impartial hearing. And if it doesn't, then you move forward to that impartial hearing.
Thank you so much for that, Hannah. Now I'm going to just briefly share the form that you would use to request mediation and the form that you would use to request an impartial hearing, just to do a little bit of a comparison, right? Because we're talking about making these requests, but families may be wondering, what forms do I use? How do I make these requests? So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so you can see what that form looks like. So this is the form to request, to request an impartial hearing, right? And so as you, oh, sorry.
And I'm actually seeing the mediation form.
I'm sorry, the form to request special education mediation. I'm sorry. Thank you for that, Hannah. So as you can see on this form, it gives you directions, right? It tells you that you can use this form to request mediation. It also tells you where to send it, right? But our recommendation here is to, and Hannah can speak more about this in a few, is to send your request directly to the mediation center. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a little bit. Here you have the student's information, so all the demographic information about the child, their name, date of birth, where they live, the name of the parent or the person in parental relationship, the best phone number, the parent's email address. And then you also have a section for the school information, right? So let me make that a little bit larger so everybody can see. So the school information, what is the address of the school? What is the name of the school? And then why are you requesting mediation? So here is your chance to talk about what is the disagreement that you're having with your child's school. They also give you the option to be able to add additional pages or documents if needed, and to explain the nature of the disagreement or concern that you're having. So this is where you're going to put your reason for requesting mediation. And then this is also an opportunity to propose a solution, right? How would you like for this disagreement to be resolved? What are you asking for? And then it tells you, if you don't know, it's okay to say that you do not know. And this is the section where you would be able to put that information. And then last but definitely not least is where you would sign and indicate your contact information as well. So this just gives you a quick overview of the form that you would use. I'm going to stop sharing. Of the form that you would use to request special education mediation. And then some of you may already be familiar with this form. I'm going to pull up the form to request an impartial hearing. Okay, so this is the form to request an impartial hearing. Right. So it's very similar to the form that you would use to request special education mediation. They are also requesting the child's information. However, I do want to point out this box right here. Let me enlarge that a little bit. And so they ask you to check only one of the three boxes, right? So this is where you can ask for an impartial hearing to be scheduled. You can they also have the option for you to request an impartial hearing, but you can request mediation instead of a resolution session. And that's something that Hannah is going to talk about a little bit later. It has here to request mediation, but you also have a more direct way to request mediation. So like I said, I shared the form already, and you can request mediation directly from one of the mediation centers. So they're asking you to check one of the three boxes, and then also check below if either of both statements apply. So also if there's already an existing impartial hearing for this particular child, and if there has been one that was withdrawn within the last 12 months. So like the special education form, you're including your child's information. So then their student ID or the OSIS number, and sometimes some parents may not know where to find that. That's typically on the first page of your child's individualized education program known as the IEP. So that ID number is very important because it helps them to be able to locate your child in the system. And then here also, just like the mediation form, you're also adding in information about the child, the school that they go to, the date of the current IEP. You're including your contact information so they have a way to be able to reach out to you, the primary language that's spoken in the home. And like the mediation form, you're also describing the problem, right? So why are you filing for an impartial hearing? What's going on, right? This is your opportunity to explain. And then what solution are you proposing? What are you asking for? This will also be where you would put that information. And then you sign at the bottom. If you have retained an attorney, the attorney's information would appear at the bottom here of the form. Just stop sharing for a second. So this was just a quick, oh, go ahead, Hannah.
No, I just wanted to jump in on what you said, Kpana, about sending the mediation form directly to us. So absolutely send it to the entities that are listed there, the CSC team, the IP team, whoever's listed there, but also do send it directly to the mediation center in the borough where your child goes to school. It'll just be processed quicker that way. It's just a more direct route. But I didn't mean to cut you off, so please go ahead.
Oh, no. I'm glad you said that. I'm sure some parents were wondering, and that tip is really helpful. So thank you so much for that. So now I'm going to give, some examples, because I know some parents may be wondering, what issues can I file? Can I have, like, if I have a particular issue, can I request special education mediation? So I'm going to share some examples of issues and ask Hannah if they can be mediated. So earlier we discussed some examples of problems and barriers that families face when navigating special education for their children. The issues below are based on those problems or barriers. And now we're going to go over them and then explain if they can be mediated, why or why not. So the first one, if you recall, is my child has not received occupational therapy since September. This might sound familiar to some of you, unfortunately. The school keeps saying they don't have anyone to provide her services. Is this something that can be mediated, Hannah?
Yes, Kpana, absolutely. And this is something I think you noted earlier that we're seeing more and more since the pandemic. So this can absolutely be mediated. And, in the mediation, the parties would discuss what to do. And sometimes in the mediation, the school will figure it out and they will find a provider to come to the school. Sometimes the conversation will center around the parent asking for a voucher so they can get the services outside the school. But it's absolutely appropriate for mediation.
Thank you. I'm sure a lot of parents will find this information helpful. Another one, it's kind of related to the first example. So let's say I decided to get my child services through insurance, right? The copays are very high per session. I want to get reimbursed since I only got private sessions because her school isn't providing decent her therapy. Is this something that can be mediated?
Yes, so Pana, that also can absolutely be mediated if you're seeking reimbursement for services. The only thing I want to point out is that there is an exception in New York City where you cannot mediate for reimbursement of private school tuition. So that really large amount of private school tuition, you can't do that in mediation. You have to go to impartial hearing. But all other reimbursement for copays or for payment of services, that can absolutely be mediated.
All right. Another example here is the school wants to put my child in an integrated class. So let's say, for example, the child is in a special class setting or a self-contained classroom, and they want to move them to an integrated co-teaching class or ICT class. But the parent disagrees and feels like the child needs more support in that smaller classroom setting. Is this something that can be mediated?
Yes, absolutely. Not only can it be mediated, but it's very appropriate for mediation because there really needs to be a conversation here, right? So the parent can come in and talk about why they really feel like their child should be in a smaller class. And together, the school and the parent can brainstorm some solutions. And in mediation, you can be very flexible. So perhaps they decide together that maybe the parent is really most concerned about math and ELA. So maybe they decide together that the child will be in the smaller class for math and ELA and be in the ICT class for other subjects. Or maybe they say that they're going to just try the ICT classroom for a short amount of time and see how it goes, right? They can come up with some really flexible solutions in mediation.
And the flexibility is really important as parents are trying to figure out how to resolve these issues. So one more example that I have here is I do not agree with my child's evaluation results. I want to get a private neuropsychological done at the district's expense. Is this something I can get mediated?
Absolutely, that is something you can mediate. You would come in as a parent and talk about why you feel like the neuropsych is important. What information is it that you're looking for that you didn't get from that original evaluation? Absolutely. And I should say, Pana, just at your list here, you're noticing that I'm saying yes to everything, right?
Yes.
And that's because pretty much everything can be mediated. The only real exceptions are for a parent making a request. Like I mentioned earlier, in New York City, you can't mediate for tuition reimbursement for like a really large amount over 25,000. You can't mediate that. And also you can't mediate for attorney's fees in New York City. But other than that, everything is really fair game. So even beyond these issues that you've listed here, Pana,
Right.
you can pretty much mediate anything.
Okay. Okay. And we try to go over some common issues, but I'm sure I could have added more. I could have added a lot more to this list. So we spoke about impartial hearings earlier, and I went through the form and showed everyone what the form looks like. What options do families have if they've already filed for an impartial hearing?
Yeah, so if you already filed for an impartial hearing, it is possible that the impartial hearing office would identify your case as being appropriate for mediation. And if they do that, they would contact you and they would contact the DOE and ask if you were interested in mediation. And if you said yes, they would refer that to the proper mediation center. But they're really busy, so that only happens in a handful of cases. So if you're interested in mediating and you've already filed for an impartial hearing, I wouldn't sit back and wait for that to happen. I'd reach out to the mediation center in the borough where your child attends school, and ask them how to request a mediation. Let them know that you have an impartial hearing that's pending. Let them know any date. So if you have any hearing dates scheduled or preliminary conferences scheduled, I would let them know that. And then I would also inform the impartial hearing office that you've requested the mediation. But you can mediate up to any point before that impartial hearing.
Okay. Okay. And I know we've mentioned the mediation center in your borough a few times. Everyone who registered for this session today should have received some information from us that includes a listing of all the mediation centers serving our 5 boroughs here in New York City. So I just want to point that out. I mentioned really briefly as I was going through the impartial hearing form about asking for mediation, instead of resolution session. What is a resolution session, and what is the difference between a resolution session and mediation?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And before I answer that, I just also just want to make it really clear that when you're looking at what mediation center to contact in your borough, it's where the borough where your child goes to school, not your home address. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
And Pana, yes. So the question is, what is a resolution session, and what's the difference between a resolution session and a mediation? So
Right.
if you file for an impartial hearing, there will be a resolution session shortly after you have filed. And what that means is that somebody from the DOE will call you and try to work out a solution with you. And that is different from mediation in several different ways. And I'm going to pull up a slide here that just kind of compares them. So you see that the resolution session is a brief meeting, right? It's going to be a quick phone call. While a mediation is longer, we usually schedule them for 2 hours. Sometimes they'll be quicker than that, but we leave that full 2 hours. And that's to give everybody a chance to really talk about their concerns. We hear from parents all the time when they call us that, they had an IEP meeting or a different kind of meeting, and they felt like they didn't get a chance to talk at all. They felt like everything was already decided. In a mediation, the mediator's trained to make sure that everybody has a voice, that there's a balance in the room, that everyone gets a chance to speak, and that everybody is heard. Another difference between the resolution and the mediation is that in a mediation session, the confidentiality is required by law. So if you do not resolve your issues in the mediation and you go forward to the impartial hearing, nothing that is said in that mediation session can be used as evidence in the impartial hearing. And that's really important because it allows the parties to speak freely and not really worry about what they're saying and whether that's going to be twisted or used as evidence later. In a resolution session, there's no requirement of confidentiality. And then you'll see here that the third difference is the parties that are actually there. So the resolution session, it'll be a DOE representative, a school representative that will call the parent and try to work things out. In a mediation, the parent can invite anyone that they think would be helpful to the conversation. So maybe they have a support person who really knows the school system well that they want to have there. Or maybe there's a private provider that's been working with their child that they feel like would add a voice. Or maybe the DOE representative wants to invite somebody that they think would be helpful, like a teacher, that really can share about what they're seeing in the school. So it's going to be a fuller conversation, right, with other voices that can really add. Now, an obvious difference is that there's no mediator in the resolution session, and a mediator is really trained in conflict resolution. But by the time they are doing special ed mediations, they have gone through a lot of training. So they can really help support that conversation and help the parties reach a resolution. You can see, I want everyone to kind of pause and look at that last line here, because that is really what this comes down to, right? Mediation works. So this is data that came from the New York State Department of Education. And you'll see that 1% of the resolutions resulted in an agreement versus 82% of the mediations resulted in agreement. So all these differences are working in favor of the parties, right? Let's stop the share.
And so as a follow-up to that, what is mediation in lieu of resolution, and how can a parent request mediation in lieu?
Okay, so mediation in lieu of resolution is mediation instead of resolution. So in that form you were showing earlier, Pana, where you had the check boxes, one of those boxes, and I know you pointed it out, was I request an impartial hearing, but I request a mediation in lieu of a resolution. If you check that box off, you're going to get that mediation instead of the resolution session.
Okay. Do parents lose any rights by choosing mediation instead of a resolution session?
That's such a great question because I'm asked that really frequently. And no, no rights at all. You're only getting added benefit. So like I mentioned, the resolution session is the DOE representative speaking to the parent trying to work things out. The mediation is that too. It's the DOE representative speaking to the parent trying to work things out, but plus a mediator there, and plus extra parties if that's helpful, and plus extra time, and plus confidentiality, right? So you're only getting added benefit. You're not getting anything taken away.
Okay, and I know you had shared a slide where I think it was 1% of cases that were successfully processed through a resolution. Please compare the number of due process cases filed to the number of mediation requests filed. I think it'll be really helpful for parents to be able to see that comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a slide here that shows that. So you'll see here that, like I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, that there were 20,000 due process complaints last year. And by comparison, you see that on the right, kind of in that blue, there are only 276 total mediation requests. So it's a much smaller number. Now, I had mentioned earlier that that out of the cases that come to the impartial hearing office, that the impartial hearing office will identify some cases as appropriate for mediation. We'll ask the parties if they want to mediate. And if they say yes, we'll divert them to the mediation centers. But you can see here that only 76 cases last year were diverted from the impartial hearing office to mediation centers. And, that's frankly because they're so busy. They have all of these complaints, so they don't really have that time to identify them. But it just shows the small number that come through that way. And we had 200 direct mediation requests come directly to the mediation centers, not through the impartial hearing office. But still, this total, 276, is much smaller than the 20,000. And, if I were to guess, I would say it's because parents don't know about mediation. It's the best kept secret. They don't know that it's an option. They don't know that it works for everything. And even if they know it's an option, they don't necessarily know that they can try it. And if it doesn't work, they can still go to an impartial hearing. So there's just not enough knowledge about it, which is one of the reasons we're here talking about it today.
Yes, definitely, definitely. So if a parent, so if a parent is considering filing for an impartial hearing, what are their options? And you spoke about this earlier, but if you could just elaborate a little bit. What options do they have if they're considering filing for an impartial hearing?
Yeah, so if a parent's considering filing for an impartial hearing, they can go ahead and file for that impartial hearing if that feels like it's the best option for them. They can instead request a mediation, and if that mediation does not work out, they can go back and file for an impartial hearing, or they can do both, right? They can file for an impartial hearing, and they can check off that box that says mediation in lieu of resolution. And that way they have two chances to try to work out their dispute. They can try the mediation first, and if that doesn't work, they'll go on to the impartial hearing.
Okay. And what if a parent opts for both the impartial hearing and mediation, and they don't resolve their case in mediation?
Yeah, so it's really important to note that mediation cannot delay or deny your right to an impartial hearing. So that mediation is never going to get in the way of your impartial hearing. Three things can happen, right? You can go to mediation and everything can resolve. You can work everything out. That's perfect. Then you'll withdraw your impartial hearing complaint because there's no need for it anymore. You're happy and everything is done. The second thing that can happen is that nothing is worked out in mediation. You give it your best effort. You have a productive conversation, but you don't work anything out. And then you can still move forward to that impartial hearing as if the mediation never happened. Because the mediation is completely confidential, nothing that happened in that mediation is going to come up in the impartial hearing. And you lost 2 hours and you're moving on to the impartial hearing. Or there's a third thing that can happen. You might reach a partial agreement. And what that means is sometimes parents have more than one dispute, right? So take the examples from earlier on. Maybe a parent is unhappy with the evaluations and is also unhappy with the placement, right? And so they're asking for two things. They're asking for an outside neuropsych, and they're asking for a 12 to 1 to 1 placement. in the mediation, maybe they resolve the issue of the neuropsych evaluation, but they don't resolve the issue of the placement. Then they would move forward to the impartial hearing only on the placement issue because they've resolved the other one, right? So that's another possibility. But mediation is never going to take away your right to an impartial hearing.
And I just want to acknowledge, we have some really great questions in the chat. So we do have some time aside to go over the questions and make sure we address everyone's questions in the chat. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Hannah, can you talk about what are the benefits of mediation? Because I think that will be really helpful for our audience today.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of benefits, and I'm going to, again, share my screen here. And I think the most obvious benefit is that it works. So you'll see here, these are mediation outcomes in New York City the past few years, and you'll see that 85% of the mediations ended up in an agreement. Now, 8% are those partial agreements that I talked about where there are several issues, but the vast majority of those cases reach agreement, right? There's only no agreement in 15% of the cases. So that's like an obvious benefit. It works. Some other benefits I have listed here. One is you see that it's empowering for all the parties. So what does that mean? I spoke to it a little earlier, but in a mediation, because there's not a third party that's making a decision, there's no impartial hearing officer or judge, it's the parents who know their child the best and the DOE, the school folks who know the schools the best. They're the ones making the decision, right? So it's really empowering for them because they're retaining that control to try to figure out some solutions. Something we haven't talked about much that is a real benefit of mediation is that it can really improve the parent and school relationship. So a lot of times in these situations, the parent and the school start to butt heads a little bit. So for example, something that we see really often is where a student has started to exhibit behaviors, right? And that could be a manifestation of their disability. And these behaviors are escalating. And the teachers are getting frustrated and they keep calling the parent. And they're calling the parent at work all the time. They're asking the parent to leave work early to come pick up their child early. And the parents getting really upset. They're worried they're going to lose the job. The teachers are getting really upset and frustrated. And there starts to become this conflict where they're fighting. And that's something that can absolutely be talked about in mediation. And they can talk about how to resolve these communication issues. So maybe they come up with a plan going forward where the school's not going to call all the time, but they're going to send an email at the end of the day. Or maybe the parent comes in once a week for a personal meeting, or they come up with something that works for everybody there. So this parent-school relationship is going to continue for a really long time, right? A lot of times there's even multiple siblings in the school. So the parent might be dealing with these same school people for years and years. So they want that relationship to work. They want it to be one of collaboration. And mediation can really help create that. Another benefit that we talked about earlier is that it's really flexible, right? And it works. So like I said, the parent knows the kid the best. The school knows the school the best. They're going to come up with solutions that stick, that really work for everybody. And these solutions can also be flexible. So like the example I just gave about the child who has behaviors. So maybe they talk about, maybe in mediation, they're talking about the student, what they can do to support the student. And they decide that they need to have a lot of evaluations, right? Really figure out what is happening here. Now, those evaluations are going to take some time. And right now, everyone's upset, right? The child isn't getting the support they need. The teacher's frustrated. The parent is upset. So they can come up with a plan for right now, an interim plan for what they're going to do to provide support until these evaluations come back. So mediation has that flexibility where they can really cater the situation to what works for their child and their situation. The last benefit that I have listed here is that mediation is efficient. It can go fast. I know me personally, I can usually schedule a mediation a few weeks after I get kind of that initial request comes into my desk, right? So at New York Peace Institute, the special education mediations are open for an average of 27 days. And that's versus 110 days the due process complaints are open. So that could be several months, right? That's a difference of several months of a child's school year where a child might not be getting the supports that they need. So that can really make a big difference. I'm going to stop the share here. Kpana, I think you're muted.
I'm sorry, everybody. So Hannah, before we get into the questions, because we have a few questions in the chat, in the Q&A, what do you want families to take away from this session today when considering if they need an impartial hearing?
Yeah, I want parents just to know that they have options, right? So impartial hearing might be the right fit for you, but if it's not, mediation is an option and you can do both, right? You can really request both and have two chances to work out the situation. And if things don't work out in the mediation, you can still move forward to that impartial hearing. And if you have any questions about whether your particular case is good for mediation or want to hear more about it, feel free to contact the mediation center in the borough where your child goes to school. If your child goes to school in Brooklyn and Manhattan, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk to you about mediation.
And Hannah's information and the information for the New York Peace Institute, everyone should have received that who registered for this session today. And so let's go to the questions. We have a few questions. So someone is stating that they had a resolution meeting prior to the winter break, and they have an impartial hearing tomorrow. The district resolution person stated a decision will be made by end of business today. What should they do? If they don't agree with the outcome of the resolution meeting, can they request to postpone the partial hearing? So I know that we can't give specific advice on a particular case, but we can give a general response as to what someone can do if they do not agree with the outcome of the resolution hearing. So I'll pass it to you, Hannah.
So I actually am not allowed to give any kind of legal advice as a mediator because
Right.
my job is to stay neutral. So I do think that you probably have resources in terms of advocates, right, Kpana, that you could maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So we so everyone who registered should have also received a list of legal resources so that you can be able to consult with an attorney in regard to your specific situation about if you have a disagreement with the resolution. Okay. All right. So we may have already touched on this. Someone wants to know how long does an impartial hearing take versus a mediation to get a result? And I think you had gone over the 20, like an average of the 27 versus the 110.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that's an average, but yeah, mediation usually is quicker because it's really just a conversation that we're scheduling and it doesn't need to be evidence prepared or anything like that. So we can usually schedule, like I said, in my particular mediation center, we can usually schedule the mediation within a few weeks. And in partial hearing, I think it's open on average for 110 days. And that's, they've really worked hard to get that number down to what it is. So it's impressive,
Yes,
but it's going
it
to
was
take
longer.
It's more of a process. So it's going to take long.
Definitely. The next question we have is, once cases are resolved through mediation, but there's a disagreement on the same issue that was already mediated down the line, can families file an impartial hearing on that same issue or an issue that falls under the same topic?
Okay, so if there's been a mediation and there's a mediation agreement that deals with those precise issues, and that mediation agreement is not being complied with, so they're not doing what they're supposed to do under the agreement, then that agreement is binding and there are ways to enforce it, like with court help. So that's something you could talk to your lawyer about. But if what you're saying is that it's a similar issue, but it's kind of a new issue, so like last year, you had issues with placement, you had a mediation, you decided that your child was going to stay in ICT, but now you're really, really feeling that your child should not be in ICT, that your child really should be in that smaller class, and that's coming up for you again, then you can absolutely mediate that again, because it's kind of a new issue, a new school year, right?
Okay. Now, someone asked a question, if we could speak about some of the difficulties with the impartial hearing process for families under oath. Are we seeing more cases that are being denied now to this prior change? I just want to jump in real quick to say that we had a session back in October where I spoke with a special education attorney just about what the transition to oath has been like. if you didn't get a chance to see that, I'm gonna put that link in the chat, because that will kind of give you like an overview of what's been going on since the impartial hearings have transitioned to oath. Hannah, I don't know if you wanted to weigh in regard to it, to anything with that question.
You know, I really can't weigh in. I just don't have the expertise about oath because it's kind of like the impartial hearing is one track and mediation's another track. And so I work exclusively in the mediation track. So I don't know enough to speak about that.
Okay, and in case anyone was wondering, OAF is the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, and they are handling the special education hearings or the impartial hearings here in New York City. So when you're filing for an impartial hearing, that hearing is going to be administered by an officer at OAF. So does anyone have any additional, oh, let me see, did I? Okay, I think that was all the questions. Does anyone else have any questions that you wanted to ask us today? Okay, so if we don't have any questions, I'll pass it back to Hannah if there's anything you wanted to close out with before we go.
I just wanted to thank you so much for having me here today and to let everyone know that if you have questions about mediation, please reach out to the mediation center in the borough where your child goes to school. We'd be happy to talk to you.
Okay, and I just want to thank everyone for joining us here today. Please stay back. We have a quick survey poll for you. And for any of our INCLUDEnyc upcoming events, please feel free to check our website calendar. I'll put that link in the chat. And I know that Katie shared our information for our helpline a little bit earlier. So if you have anything specific in regard to your child or a child that you're supporting, please reach out to our helpline. We have the English helpline and the Spanish helpline as well. And Katie shared that information in the chat again for everybody. Yes, so if a parent wants to reopen their child's IEP, I would suggest that you can call our helpline and one of our family educators can be able to get more information from you. So someone had just sent us a message about reopening their child's IEP. So I would ask that you please call our helpline. The helpline is Monday through Thursday from 9 to 3. If you call outside of those hours, just leave a message and we'll get back to you as soon as we're back in the office. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining me and all the great information that you shared. Thank you, Anna, for helping us with interpretation, and Katie with Zoom support. Have a good afternoon, everyone.